There is something watching you right now, not from outside, not from above, not from some distant vantage point beyond the edges of your perception, from inside, from the place that has always been inside. The place that was there before you had a name for yourself, before you learned what you were supposed to want, before you built the architecture of the person you've been performing for everyone around you, including yourself. Something is watching all of that, and it has been watching for a very long time. You felt it. You know you have. In the moments between reactions, in the silence after someone says something that should have devastated you, and instead you notice yourself noticing your devastation, there's a flicker, a recognition, a sense that whoever is observing this experience is not quite the same as the experience itself. That the one who watches the fear is not afraid. That the one who watches the grief is not grieving. That something in you has been maintaining a position of radical stillness even as everything around it moved. That's not a spiritual concept. That's not a metaphor. That is a precise description of a mechanism that quantum physics has been pointing at for over a century. A mechanism that, once you see it clearly, once you actually watch it activate in real time, reorganizes everything you thought you knew about who you are and what reality actually is. Today, that mechanism activates for you. Not because I'm going to give you a technique, not because I'm going to hand you a belief system to adopt, but because you're going to watch it happen. And at the quantum level, watching something happen is not passive. It is the most powerful thing a conscious being can do. Here's what no one tells you about observation. When quantum physicists first discovered that the act of measuring a particle changed its behavior, that electrons behave differently when watched than when unobserved, the scientific community was shaken, not metaphorically shaken, literally, fundamentally, philosophically destabilized. Because what the double-slit experiment revealed was not just a quirk of subatomic physics. It revealed something about the nature of reality itself. Reality, at its most fundamental level, does not exist in a fixed state until it is observed. It exists as a field of probability, a superposition of all possible states simultaneously. And it is the act of observation that collapses that field into a single, definite, measurable outcome. You've probably heard this before. You may have nodded along and filed it under interesting, but I want you to stop right now and actually look at what that means, not for electrons, for you. If reality is a probability field that collapses into specific form through the act of observation, then the quality, the depth, the direction of your observation is not incidental to your experience. It is the mechanism of your experience. You are not watching a reality that already exists. You are participating in the collapse of possibility into form every single moment of every single day. The question is not whether you're doing this. You are always doing this. The question is whether you're doing it consciously or unconsciously, whether you're the quantum watcher, the deliberate, clear, fully activated observer, or whether you're the one being watched by your own unconscious patterns, reacting to a reality that feels fixed and inevitable because you've never stopped to observe how it's actually being constructed. And here's the thing that changes everything. Here's the thing that once you see it, you cannot unsee. The moment you activate your quantum watcher, the moment you shift from being the reactor to being the witness, you don't just change how you experience reality. You change what reality is doing. Because at the quantum level, the observer and the observed are not separate. They are entangled. They are in a relationship that is so intimate, so fundamental, that the idea of a fixed, independent reality existing somewhere out there waiting to be discovered is not just philosophically questionable, it is scientifically inaccurate. Nothing will be the same again after you see this. Not because I'm promising you transformation, but because once the Quantum Watcher activates, once that part of you that has always been watching steps fully into its function, the mechanism of your reality creation becomes visible to you. And what is visible cannot hide. What is seen cannot pretend to be unseen. What has been brought into the light of clear observation cannot retreat back into the shadow of unconscious control. So let's go there. Let's actually look at this. Not from a comfortable distance, up close, closer than you've been willing to get before. If what you're seeing here is landing for you, take a second to like this video and subscribe so we can keep going deeper together. Now let's keep going. Let's begin with something you've been avoiding. There is a pattern in your life that you recognize but haven't fully faced. You know what I'm talking about. It's the thing that keeps showing up in different costumes, different relationships, different jobs, different circumstances, but wearing the same essential face. The same feeling in your body when it arrives, the same sequence of events, the same ending or the same kind of ending that leaves you wondering why this keeps happening, why you keep finding yourself here, why the world seems to be conspiring to deliver you the same lesson over and over again. You've probably tried to fix it. You've probably tried to think your way out of it, to will your way out of it, to attract your way out of it. You've probably done the work, the journaling, the therapy, the breath work, the manifestation practices, and found that the pattern is still there, slightly more sophisticated in how it presents itself, but fundamentally unchanged. Here's why. Because you've been trying to change the pattern while looking away from it. You've been trying to fix what you're refusing to fully observe. And at the quantum level, that is not just ineffective. It is the mechanism that perpetuates the pattern. Because what you avoid observing, you cannot collapse into a new form. It remains in its current state, fixed, repeating, apparently inevitable, precisely because your attention never lands on it long enough, clearly enough, without the distortion of interpretation and reaction, to actually initiate the collapse. The Quantum Watcher doesn't fix the pattern. It watches the pattern, clearly, without flinching, without interpreting, without immediately reaching for a solution. And in that watching, in that precise, sustained, non-reactive observation, the pattern begins to lose its coherence, not because you've attacked it, because you've seen it. And what is fully seen at the level of quantum reality cannot maintain the same probability structure it had when it was hidden. This is not metaphor. This is the mechanism. But look closer, because there's a layer underneath that which most people miss. Most people, when they hear about the observer effect, think of it as a tool, a technique, something they can deploy strategically to change outcomes. And so they begin to watch their patterns the way a scientist watches a specimen, clinically from behind glass, with the implicit goal of eliminating what they're observing. And they wonder why it doesn't work, why the watching itself feels like another form of struggle. Here's what they're missing. The Quantum Watcher is not a tool you use. It is what you are. And the confusion between using observation as a technique and recognizing observation as your fundamental nature That confusion is the thing that keeps the quantum watcher from fully activating. Because a tool can be put down, a technique can be abandoned when it gets uncomfortable. But what you are cannot be put down, cannot be abandoned, can only be recognized or ignored. And the moment you recognize it, the moment you stop trying to use the observer and start recognizing that you are the observer, everything shifts. Not gradually, not incrementally. The shift is immediate because recognition is not a process. Recognition is a moment, a collapse of probability into certainty, a before and an after with nothing in between. That's what activation means. That's what it means when the quantum watcher activates. Not that you learn something new, that you see something that was always there. And the seeing changes everything because the seeing is not separate from what it sees. You and your reality are not separate systems. You are entangled. And when the observer in the entanglement becomes clear, when the quantum watcher fully activates, the entire entangled system reorganizes around that clarity. Nothing will be the same again. Let me show you something. Let me give you a story that will make this precise. There was a man named Elias who lived in a house with 100 mirrors. Not ordinary mirrors. These mirrors had been in the house when he arrived, and he had never questioned them. He had grown up in this house, learned to navigate its corridors by the reflections they offered, and over time, without ever making a conscious decision to do so, he had come to believe that the reflections were the truth, that what the mirrors showed him was what he actually was. Some of the mirrors were flattering. They showed him capable, admired, significant. He spent time in front of these. He arranged his mornings around them. He made decisions based on what they reflected back. Some of the mirrors were distorted. They showed him small, insufficient, perpetually behind. He tried to avoid these. He covered some of them with cloth. He rearranged the furniture to block his view of others. But they were still there. And in the dark, when he couldn't see them, he could feel their presence, feel the distorted image they held of him radiating outward into the rooms he moved through, shaping the house around their version of who he was. And then one day, something changed. Not in the mirrors, in Elias. He was standing in the corridor between the flattering mirrors and the ones he'd covered, and for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he stopped. Not to look at a mirror, not to check his reflection. He stopped and he looked at the looking. He watched himself watching. He noticed the act of his own observation, the way his eyes moved toward the flattering images and away from the distorted ones, the way his body changed depending on which mirror he faced, the way he had been his entire life, not seeing himself at all, but seeing what the mirrors showed him and calling that the truth. In that moment, Elias became the observer, not the observed, not the reflection, the one who watches. And from that position, something became visible that had never been visible before. The mirrors were not showing him truth. They were showing him frequency. They were showing him the specific range of possibility that his attention had been collapsing into form by the consistent, unconscious direction of his gaze. The flattering mirrors were flattering because he had spent so much time in front of them that he had, in a very real sense, created their flattery. And the distorted mirrors were distorted because his avoidance of them, his refusal to look clearly at what they reflected, had left those images uncorrected, growing more extreme in their distortion with each year he looked away. The house had not been showing him who he was. The house had been showing him what his observation had created. And the moment he saw that, the moment the quantum watcher in Elias activated fully, the mirrors began to change. Not because he did anything to them, because the quality of observation in the house had fundamentally shifted. The observer had changed. And at the quantum level, when the observer changes, the observed changes with it. Elias did not redecorate the house. He did not smash the distorted mirrors. He did not spend more time in front of the flattering ones. He simply watched, clearly, without the agenda of fixing what he saw. And the house, the entire probability field of his reality, which had been collapsing into the same patterns for decades, began to reorganize around his clarity. And you have been both Elias and the house. You have been both the one who looks and the mirrors that reflect. You've been creating your reality through the quality of your observation without knowing that observation was what you were doing. You have been collapsing probability into pattern over and over by the consistent, unconscious direction of your attention. But today you are choosing to watch the watching, and that is the moment the quantum watcher activates. I want to pause here and ask you something. Think about a mirror in your own life that you've been covering, a pattern or a truth you've been circling without fully looking at. What happened the moment you stopped looking away from it, even briefly? Drop that in the comments. What did you see when you finally let yourself look? Let's go deeper into what you're actually seeing. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. I want you to do something right now, not later, not when you have more time or more quiet or more certainty that you're doing it right. Right now. Notice that you are watching this. Notice that there is something in you that is receiving these words, processing them, responding to them, and notice that that something is not the words themselves. It is not the thoughts the words are generating. It is not the feelings those thoughts are producing. There is something prior to all of that, something that is watching the words arrive, watching the thoughts form, watching the feelings move through the body, something that is watching all of it without being any of it. That's the quantum watcher. That's what it feels like when it's active. Not a dramatic shift in consciousness, not a mystical experience, a simple, clear recognition of the position you're actually in. You are the observer. You have always been the observer. Everything else, every thought, every feeling, every identity, every pattern, every story you've ever told yourself about who you are and why your life looks the way it does, all of it is the observed. Now here's the practice. Stay in that position for a moment. Don't analyze what you're observing. Don't try to change it. Don't judge it as good or bad, useful or useless, something to keep or something to release. Just watch. Watch the thoughts that arise about what you're watching. Watch the impulse to do something with what you see. Watch the discomfort that might be arising with simply being still and observing without acting. Watch it all. And notice that the one who is watching remains unchanged by what it watches. The quantum watcher is not disturbed by the content of what it sees. It is not threatened by the patterns it observes. It is not diminished by the distorted mirrors or inflated by the flattering ones. It simply sees clearly, without flinching, without needing the observed to be different than it is. That is the most powerful position in the universe. Not because it controls, because it sees. And clarity Genuine, unflinching, non-reactive clarity is the only force that transforms without resistance. Because it doesn't push against what it's transforming, it simply illuminates it. And what is fully illuminated cannot remain hidden, cannot maintain the structure that depended on being unobserved. Now come back. Bring that quality of watching with you, because we're going deeper. Here's the layer underneath that. When quantum physicists describe the observer effect, they're careful, or they should be careful, to distinguish between different types of observation, because not all observation collapses probability in the same way. The quality of the observation matters. The coherence of the observing system matters, and this is where the science becomes not just interesting, but directly applicable to what happens in your life. A coherent observer, a measuring device that is stable, consistent, and not interfering with itself, produces a clean collapse, a clear outcome, a definite state. An incoherent observer, one that is internally contradictory, oscillating between different measurement states, sending mixed signals, produces a muddled collapse, a smeared outcome, a reality that looks uncertain, inconsistent, and unpredictable, not because reality is those things, but because the observer is. Now watch what happens when you apply this to yourself. When you are in a state of internal contradiction, wanting one thing consciously while believing something different unconsciously, intending a new pattern while maintaining the emotional frequency of the old one, saying you want change while being terrified of what change would actually require, you are an incoherent observer, and the probability field of your reality collapses accordingly. Not into what you consciously want, into the smeared, contradictory, oscillating outcome that reflects the incoherence of the observer. This is why affirmations don't work the way people expect them to. This is why vision boards sometimes produce the opposite of what was intended. This is why you can want something with everything you consciously have and still find that it doesn't materialize, or materializes in a distorted form that doesn't actually give you what you were reaching for. Because the wanting is coherent, but the observer is not. Because the conscious intention is pointing in one direction, while the unconscious observation, the deep, automatic, habitual way you watch yourself and your reality, is pointing in another. The quantum watcher activates coherence, not by forcing the unconscious to agree with the conscious, but by watching both, by seeing the contradiction clearly, by bringing the full light of observation to the gap between what you say you want and what you actually believe is possible, between the identity you're performing and the identity that's running the show underneath the performance. Because here's what happens when you watch that gap. When you actually see it, not judge it, not try to close it by force, not shame yourself for having it, but simply observe it with the clear, steady gaze of the quantum watcher. The gap begins to close on its own, not because you pushed it closed, because observation is itself a form of coherence. The act of seeing the contradiction clearly is the beginning of the contradiction's resolution, because a contradiction can only persist in the dark. In the light of clear observation, it reveals itself as two parts of a whole that have been pretending to be opposites, and in being seen together, they begin to integrate. That's not belief, that's quantum mechanics. But look closer, because there's something even more precise happening when the quantum watcher activates. Something that goes beyond coherence, beyond the resolution of internal contradiction, into the territory of what physicists call quantum entanglement. and what ancient wisdom traditions have been calling something else for thousands of years. When two particles become entangled, they are no longer separate systems. What happens to one instantly affects the other, regardless of the distance between them. There is no signal traveling between them. There is no mechanism of cause and effect. There is simply a connection so fundamental, so woven into the fabric of what they are, that the distinction between them becomes, in a very real sense, meaningless. You are entangled with your reality, not metaphorically. In the same way that a quantum observer is entangled with what it observes, in the same way that the act of measurement is not separate from the thing being measured. You and the field of your experience are not separate systems. You are a unified quantum event. And when the observer in that unified event changes, when the quantum watcher activates and the quality of observation shifts from unconscious reaction to clear, coherent witnessing, the entire entangled system changes with it. This is why nothing will be the same again after the quantum watcher activates. Not because you've acquired a new skill, not because you've adopted a new belief, but because the fundamental nature of the entangled system you are has shifted. The observer has become conscious of itself. And a conscious observer in an entangled system is not the same as an unconscious one. It's a different system. It produces different collapses. It creates different realities. And here's the thing that most people miss when they hear this. They think becoming a conscious observer means becoming more controlled, more deliberate, more careful about where they put their attention. And while there's truth in that, it's not the whole truth. Because the quantum watcher is not careful in the way that fear is careful. It's not watching everything closely because it's afraid of what might happen if it looks away. It's watching everything closely because watching is its nature. Because seeing clearly is not an effort for the quantum watcher. It is what it is. And from that place, from the place of effortless, natural, uncontrived observation, reality responds in a way that controlled, effortful, strategic observation never quite produces. Because reality is not responding to your strategies, it's responding to your frequency, to the coherence or incoherence of the observer you are. And the quantum watcher, fully activated, is the most coherent observer possible. Not because it's trying to be coherent, because coherence is what happens when the observer stops fighting with what it observes and simply sees it. Let me give you the second layer of this. Let me show you what the quantum watcher actually looks like when it's activated in the context of a real human life. Not in a laboratory, not in a thought experiment, in the messy, complicated, pattern-repeating, mirror-filled house of an actual human experience. There was a woman named Mira who had spent 15 years becoming someone she was very good at being. She was precise, capable, measured. She made decisions well. She maintained composure in situations that would have undone others. She had built a life that, from the outside, looked like exactly what she had wanted. And from the inside, it felt like wearing a coat that fit perfectly, but was made of something that never quite breathed. She had tried everything she could think of to change this feeling. She had changed her circumstances, her location, her career, her relationships. She had done the inner work, the excavation of childhood patterns, the identification of limiting beliefs, the construction of new narratives about who she was. And none of it had touched the feeling. The feeling remained precise, capable, measured, and quietly suffocating. One evening, sitting in the life she had built so carefully, Mira stopped. Not to think, to watch. She watched the feeling, not to understand it, not to change it, not to find its origin in some formative experience she could then process and release. She watched it the way you watch weather, with the recognition that you are not the weather, that the storm does not define the sky, that the sky remains the sky regardless of what moves through it. And in watching the feeling without trying to do anything with it, she saw something she had never seen before. The feeling was not the problem. The feeling was a signal, a precise, accurate, quantum-level communication from the entangled field of her reality, telling her something that her careful, controlled, managed mind had been systematically filtering out. The feeling was showing her the gap, the distance between the observer she had been performing as and the observer she actually was, between the Mira who made decisions well and maintained composure and the Mira who was watching all of that and had never been asked what she actually saw. The quantum watcher in Mira had been active all along. It had been watching the performance, watching the careful construction, watching the coat that fit but didn't breathe. It had been generating the feeling as a communication, as a quantum signal from the observer to the observed, saying, "This is not a true collapse, this is a forced collapse. This is what happens when the observer is trying to control the outcome rather than watching it clearly." And when Mira saw that, and when she watched the watching and recognized the quantum watcher that had been there all along, generating the signal she had been calling a problem, the coat began to change. Not because she took it off, because the observer who had been wearing it became visible. And an observer who is visible to itself cannot be defined by what it's wearing, cannot be confined by the patterns it has been observing, cannot be held in a reality that was created by a less conscious version of itself. Mira did not make a dramatic change. She did not leave her life. She did not burn anything down. She simply began to watch differently, to bring the quantum watcher into every decision, every interaction, every moment of the life she had built. Not to judge what she found, not to fix what didn't fit, but to see it clearly. And in that clear seeing, the life began to reorganize, not around what she had been performing, around what the quantum watcher actually saw. And you have been wearing something that doesn't breathe. You know what it is. You felt the feeling that Mira felt. The sense that the life you've constructed, however good it looks, however much effort you've put into building it, is not quite the life that the part of you that watches would choose. Not because it's wrong, because it was built by a less conscious observer, an observer who was reacting rather than watching, who was collapsing probability based on fear and habit and the distorted mirrors of other people's expectations rather than the clear, coherent gaze of the quantum watcher. The quantum watcher in you has been watching all of this. It has been generating signals, feelings, patterns, recurring situations that are not punishments or obstacles or evidence of your unworthiness. They are quantum communications, precise, accurate transmissions from the observer to the observed, saying, "Look here, look at this. There is something in this that has not been fully seen, and what has not been fully seen cannot transform. Today, you're looking." Has there been a moment in your own life when watching something clearly, really staying with it instead of managing it, dissolved its hold on you? Tell me what that was like in the comments. What changed when you stopped reacting and started seeing? Let's go deeper into what that actually means. What does it mean to look at something quantum mechanically? What is the quality of observation that the quantum watcher brings that ordinary reactive attention doesn't? There are 3 properties that distinguish the quantum watcher's observation from ordinary reactive attention. And each one is something you can actually feel the difference between, not just understand conceptually. The first is non-interference. The quantum watcher observes without trying to change what it observes. This sounds simple, but it is radical. Because most of what we call observation in everyday life is actually interference. We look at our patterns and immediately begin to judge them, categorize them, trace them to their origins, devise strategies to eliminate them. We look at our feelings and immediately try to manage them, suppress them, express them, or transform them. We look at our circumstances and immediately begin to calculate how to change them. None of this is observation. It is all reaction. It is all interference with the quantum field of what we're observing, introducing noise into the measurement system, producing incoherent collapses that don't reflect what we actually want. The quantum watcher watches without interfering. It sees the pattern and does not reach for a solution. It sees the feeling and does not reach for management. It sees the circumstance and does not immediately calculate change. It simply sees clearly, without the static of reaction. And in that non-interfering observation, the quantum field has the space to collapse into its most natural, coherent state, which is always more aligned with what the observer actually is than with what the observer has been trying to force. The second property is sustained attention. The quantum watcher doesn't glance. It watches. There is a difference between glancing at something and watching it, and that difference is not just a matter of duration, it is a matter of depth. Glancing is what we do when we're afraid of what we might see if we look long enough. We approach, we register the surface, we retreat. We tell ourselves we've looked, but we haven't watched. We haven't stayed with what we're observing long enough for its deeper structure to become visible. Most people glance at their patterns, they acknowledge them, sometimes with considerable sophistication and psychological vocabulary, and then they retreat into the familiar safety of not quite looking. The quantum watcher sustains its attention. It stays with what it's observing. It watches the pattern move through its full cycle without looking away. And in that sustained watching, something becomes visible that glancing never reveals. The architecture of the pattern. The structure beneath the surface. The mechanism by which the pattern perpetuates itself. And when the mechanism becomes visible, it is no longer invisible. It is no longer operating in the dark. It is observed. And at the quantum level, the observed cannot maintain the same structure it had when it was unobserved. The third property is what I will call sovereign neutrality. The quantum watcher is not neutral in the sense of being indifferent. It is not detached in the sense of not caring. It cares enormously. It is, in fact, the part of you that cares most deeply, that sees most clearly what matters and what doesn't. But it is neutral in the sense that it does not need what it's observing to be different than it is in order to be at peace. It does not bring the agenda of fixing, changing, improving, or eliminating. It brings only the agenda of seeing clearly. And from that position of sovereign neutrality, that position of caring deeply while needing nothing to change, the observation has a quality that transforms without effort. because it is not pushing against what it's observing, it is simply illuminating it. And illumination is not a force, it is a condition in which what was hidden becomes visible, and what becomes visible can no longer pretend to be what it was when it was hidden. Non-interference, sustained attention, sovereign neutrality. These are the three properties of the Quantum Watcher's observation. And they are not things you have to learn, they are things you have to recognize, because they are already present in the part of you that has been watching all along. The Quantum Watcher already observes this way. You just haven't been in that position consciously. You've been in the position of the reactor, the manager, the fixer, the one who glances and retreats. And the Quantum Watcher has been watching you do that. Now you're watching the Quantum Watcher watching. And that recursive observation, that moment of seeing the seer, is the activation. Let's pause here again, because this is where the practice deepens. Close your eyes if you can, or soften your gaze if you need to keep them open, and notice, just notice, what is watching right now. Not what is being watched, not the thoughts, not the feelings, not the sensations in the body, not the questions arising about whether you're doing this right. Notice what is watching all of that. Feel the position of the observer. It is not located in the head, though the head wants to claim it. It is not located in the heart, though the heart wants to claim it. It is not located anywhere because location is a property of the observed, not the observer. The Quantum Watcher has no location. It is the space in which location happens, the awareness in which all experience arises and passes. Stay there for a moment, in that position, in that awareness. Notice that from this position, everything you've been calling your problems, your patterns, your limitations, your identity, all of it is visible. All of it is observable, which means none of it is you, because you are the observer, and the observer is not what it observes. Now notice something specific. Notice that from this position, there is no urgency. There is no panic, there is no sense that something must be fixed immediately or disaster will follow. The Quantum Watcher is not afraid of what it sees. It is not threatened by the patterns it observes. It does not need the patterns to change in order to remain stable.
It is stable because stability is its nature. Stability is the nature of the observer. The observed changes constantly. The observer remains. And now, bring something into this space. Bring the pattern you've been avoiding looking at. The thing I mentioned at the beginning. The recurring situation, the persistent feeling, the identity you've been performing. The gap between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. Bring it into the space of the Quantum Watcher's observation. Don't analyze it. Don't try to understand it. Don't reach for a solution. Just watch it from this position of sovereign neutrality. Watch it the way the sky watches the weather, knowing that it will move through, knowing that it is not you, knowing that the act of watching it clearly from this position is already changing it at the quantum level. Stay there. Watch. Let what you see be what it is, and now come back, because there's more to see. Here's where it gets precise. Here's the layer that most teachings about the observer effect miss. The layer that, when you see it, explains why the Quantum Watcher is not just a meditation technique or a mindfulness practice, but a fundamental shift in the mechanism of reality creation. Quantum physicists distinguish between what they call a weak measurement and a strong measurement.
A weak measurement gathers partial information about a quantum system without fully collapsing its superposition. The system remains in a mixed state, partially observed, partially in superposition. A strong measurement collapses the superposition completely, producing a definite outcome. Now apply this to your observation of your own life. Most of what we do with our attention is weak measurement. We partially look at our patterns. We partially acknowledge our feelings. We partially see the gap between who we are and who we've been performing. Enough to feel the discomfort of partial seeing, which is worse than not seeing at all, because it produces the anxiety of knowing without the clarity of fully knowing, but not enough to collapse the superposition into a definite, workable, transformable reality. This is why so many people feel stuck in a state of half-knowing. They know something is off. They know the pattern is there. They know the gap exists, but they've never fully looked. They've never brought the quantum watcher into full activation, never committed to the strong measurement that collapses the uncertainty into something clear enough to work with. The quantum watcher, when fully activated, makes strong measurements. It sees completely. Not because it's more intelligent or more evolved or more spiritually advanced, but because it is not afraid of what a full collapse reveals, because it knows, at the deepest level of its nature, that what collapses into clarity is always more workable than what remains in superposition. That a definite state, however uncomfortable, is always preferable to the sustained anxiety of uncertain superposition. That seeing the thing clearly, even if what you see is painful, is always the beginning of transformation. Because you cannot transform what you haven't fully seen. And here's the profound paradox at the heart of this. The things we avoid seeing most strongly are the things that are most desperately waiting to be seen. The patterns we most consistently look away from are the ones that have the most energy behind them, the most potential for transformation, precisely because they haven't been collapsed yet. They are still in superposition, still holding every possible version of themselves simultaneously. And the moment the quantum watcher makes a full, strong measurement, the moment it looks completely and clearly, that superposition collapses, not into the worst version, not into the most feared version, into the most coherent version, the version that the observer, in its clarity, is capable of seeing. This is why what you're avoiding looking at is the exact thing that transforms when you do, not despite the avoidance, because of it. The avoidance is the signal. The avoidance tells you where the superposition is, where the potential is, where the quantum watcher's observation will have the most profound effect. Look at what you've been avoiding, not to fix it, to collapse it into clarity, to make the strong measurement that transforms the uncertain field into a definite, workable, transformable reality. That's not belief. That's quantum mechanics. Now let's talk about what happens after the quantum watcher activates. Because this is where people sometimes get confused. They experience the activation. They feel the shift from reactive attention to clear observation. They feel the position of the quantum watcher become available to them. And then they wait for something external to change. They look around at their circumstances and find them largely the same and conclude that the activation didn't work, that they imagined it, that this is another technique that sounds profound but doesn't actually produce results. Here's what they're missing. The change doesn't begin outside, it begins in the observer. And the change in the observer is not always immediately visible in the observed. There is a lag, not because the quantum field is slow, but because the patterns that have been collapsing in a particular way for years, sometimes decades, have a momentum, a structural inertia. And the quantum watcher's clear observation is not a force that smashes through that inertia. It is a condition that allows the inertia to complete itself and then not regenerate. Think of it this way: if you've been rolling a boulder down a particular hill for 20 years and you suddenly stop pushing, the boulder doesn't immediately stop. It continues rolling for a while under its own momentum. And someone watching might say, "You stopped pushing, but the boulder is still moving. The technique didn't work." But that's not what's happening. What's happening is that the momentum is completing itself. And the next time you're at the top of the hill, there's no push. There's no boulder rolling down that particular slope. Because the observer who was pushing has changed, has become the quantum watcher. And the quantum watcher doesn't push boulders, it watches them. And what it watches, it changes. The change in your external reality after the quantum watcher activates will be recognizable by a specific quality. It will feel like things resolving rather than things changing, like circumstances that were stuck beginning to move. Not because you forced them, but because the observer holding them in place has shifted, like relationships that were frozen beginning to thaw, not because you said the right thing or did the right thing, but because the quality of your observation of those relationships has changed. And at the quantum level, when the observer changes, the observed changes with it. Always. Without exception. You will also notice something subtler. You will notice that the things you were afraid to look at, the patterns, the gaps, the distorted mirrors you'd been covering, begin to feel less threatening. Not because they've changed yet, but because you're watching them from the position of the quantum watcher, which is not threatened by what it sees. And when you're not threatened by what you're looking at, you can look more clearly. And when you look more clearly, you see more completely. And when you see more completely, the collapse is more coherent, and a more coherent collapse produces a more aligned reality. This is the virtuous cycle of the quantum watcher. Once it activates, it generates the conditions for its own deepening. Because clear observation reveals more to observe clearly. And each layer of clear observation produces a more coherent reality, which is easier to observe clearly, which reveals the next layer. It is not a spiral upward in the sense of escaping anything. It is a spiral inward, into greater and greater precision of seeing, into deeper and deeper coherence of the observer, into a reality that reflects with increasing accuracy the truth of what the quantum watcher actually is. Nothing will be the same again, not because everything changes at once, but because the mechanism of change has changed, because the observer has changed, and when the observer changes, the entire entangled system, the entire quantum field of your experience, changes with it. Let me show you one more layer of this, one more story that makes it precise. There was a young man named Kyle who had spent his entire adult life in pursuit of something he couldn't quite name. He had tried to name it. He had called it success, then freedom, then love, then peace, then purpose. And each time he named it, he pursued the name, and each time he caught what the name pointed to, he found that it wasn't quite the thing. That the thing he was actually pursuing was still ahead of him, still just out of reach, still requiring one more achievement, one more relationship, one more transformation of circumstances before it would finally arrive. He was not unhappy in any dramatic way. He was simply perpetually almost there, perpetually in the condition of almost having what he was looking for, which is, in its own way, one of the most exhausting conditions a human being can sustain. One afternoon, Kyle was sitting by a river. He had come there to think, to plan his next move toward the thing he couldn't name. And instead of thinking, he found himself watching the river, not analyzing it, not extracting metaphors from it, just watching it, the way the light moved on the surface, the way the current moved around the rocks, the way the whole thing was in constant motion, and yet somehow always the river, always itself, always recognizable as river despite never being the same water twice. And in watching the river, Kyle became aware of something that had been present for his entire life, but that he had never quite seen. He had been watching the river the way he watched everything, from the position of someone looking for what the river could give him, looking for the metaphor, the insight, the inspiration that would translate into the next move toward the thing he couldn't name. He had never simply watched the river as the river. He had always watched it as a resource, as something to be observed for what it could provide to the observer. And in that moment of seeing his own watching, Kyle felt something shift, not dramatically, a settling, a quality of attention that had always been slightly forward-leaning, slightly reaching, slightly in pursuit, suddenly resting, not because he had given up on what he was looking for, because he had, for the first time, stopped looking for it and started simply looking. And in the quality of that simple, non-reaching, non-pursuing observation, something became visible. The river was not almost there. The river was entirely, completely, perfectly itself in every moment, not despite the constant motion, because of it. The river's wholeness was not a destination it was approaching. It was the nature of the movement itself. The river was not becoming the river. It was rivering continuously, completely, without any sense that something was missing. And Kyle saw, with a clarity that felt like the first real seeing of his life, that he had been pursuing something that could not be pursued, that the thing he couldn't name was not ahead of him. It was the quality of the observation he was in right now. The thing he had been calling almost there was the quantum watcher, watching him search for the quantum watcher. The thing he had been calling freedom was the position of the observer, which he had been in all along and had never recognized because he was too busy using his observation as a tool for pursuit, rather than recognizing it as what he already was. The thing Kyle had been looking for was the looking itself. And you have been looking for something. You may have given it different names at different points in your life. Peace, freedom, love, belonging, purpose, certainty. The sense that you have finally arrived at the version of your life that matches the version you carry somewhere inside you. And you have been using your observation, your attention, your awareness, your consciousness as a tool to find that thing, as a vehicle for pursuit. But the quantum watcher is not a vehicle, it is the destination. Not in the sense that you arrive at it and stop moving, in the sense that it is what you are. That the quality of observation you have been seeking, the clarity, the peace, the sense of being fully present and fully alive and fully yourself, is not something the quantum watcher will bring you to. It is what the quantum watcher is, and the moment it activates, the moment you stop using observation as a tool and recognize it as your nature, you are not approaching that quality, you are in it. This is why nothing will be the same again. Not because your life will look different tomorrow, though it will begin to reorganize. Not because your patterns will dissolve overnight, though they will begin to lose their grip. But because the mechanism of your pursuit has transformed, you are no longer the seeker using observation to find what you're seeking. You are the observer, and the observer is not seeking. The observer is seeing, and what it sees, it changes, including itself. Let's go to the deepest layer now, the layer that everything else has been preparing you to see. Here is the thing that no one tells you about the quantum watcher. The thing that is perhaps the most radical, most disorienting, most liberating recognition available to a human being. The quantum watcher is not watching your life. The quantum watcher is watching itself, and in watching itself, it is creating the life. Let me be precise about this, because this is not a mystical claim. This is the logical conclusion of what quantum mechanics reveals about the relationship between observer and observed. If the observer and the observed are entangled, if they are not separate systems but a unified quantum event, then the observer is not outside the system, watching it from a neutral vantage point. The observer is in the system, is of the system, is, in the most fundamental sense, the system observing itself. And when the system observes itself clearly, when the quantum watcher activates, and the quality of self-observation becomes coherent and non-reactive and sustained, the system reorganizes around that clarity. Not because the quantum watcher is telling the system what to be, because the system is the quantum watcher. And when the quantum watcher sees itself clearly, it is not seeing something other than itself. It is recognizing itself. And recognition, genuine, complete, unflinching recognition, is the most powerful creative act available to consciousness. This is what the ancient traditions were pointing at when they said things like the observer and the observed are one, or consciousness is the ground of being, or you are not in the universe. The universe is in you. These are not poetic statements, they are precise descriptions of the quantum relationship between consciousness and reality. The universe is not a stage on which you perform. It is a field of probability that you, as the observer, are constantly collapsing into form. And the form it collapses into reflects not just your conscious intentions, but the total quality of your observation, the coherence or incoherence, the clarity or distortion, the depth or shallowness of the seeing that you bring to the act of being alive. The quantum watcher, fully activated, brings the deepest possible seeing. Not because it is more intelligent or more evolved, because it is the observer in its natural state, uncontracted, undefended, not trying to protect itself from what it might see. The quantum watcher is the observer before fear, before the construction of identity, before the house of mirrors, before the pursuit of the thing that cannot be pursued. It is what you were before you learned to look away, and it is what you are returning to now. Not returning in the sense of going backward, returning in the sense of recognizing, of coming home to what you have always been, of seeing with sudden and complete clarity that the position you've been seeking, the peace, the freedom, the sense of being fully yourself, was the position of the observer all along, was the quantum watcher, was what has been watching everything you've been through, everything you've been afraid of, everything you've been reaching for, with a steadiness and a clarity that none of it has ever disturbed. That is who you are. That is what activates today. And once it activates, once you fully recognize it, not as a concept, not as a spiritual idea, but as the direct experience of the position you're actually in right now, nothing will be the same again. Because you will see differently. Because you will observe from a different position. Because the quality of observation you bring to every moment of your life will carry the coherence, the non-interference, the sovereign neutrality of the quantum watcher. And at the quantum level, that changes everything. Not all at once, not dramatically, but fundamentally, irreversibly, the way that seeing something clearly changes it, not by force, but by illumination. Let's do the final practice, the deepest one, the one that is not really a practice at all, but a recognition. Pause here. Let everything settle. Let the words that have been moving through you settle. Let the concepts, the stories, the recognitions settle. Let the part of you that has been receiving all of this settle into the part of you that has been watching it receive. And from that settled, watching position, ask yourself something. Not to answer it, to watch what happens when you ask it. Who is watching right now? Not what is watching, not how the watching works. Who? Stay with that. Watch the mind's attempts to answer. Watch the impulse to say, I am watching, or awareness is watching, or consciousness is watching. Watch all the answers arise and pass, and notice that what is watching the answers arise and pass is not any of the answers, is not any of the concepts, is prior to all of them, is the space in which all of them appear. That is the quantum watcher. That is what you are, not a concept, not a technique, not a spiritual identity you've adopted. The actual, living, present, watching awareness that is here right now, reading these words, receiving this transmission, seeing what has been seen today. Notice that it has always been here, that it was here before this video, that it will be here after, that it was here before every pattern you've ever struggled with, before every fear you've ever been gripped by, before every identity you've ever constructed or abandoned. It was here, watching, clearly, without flinching, without needing anything to be different. That is the quantum watcher, and it has just activated. Not because I activated it, because you looked, because you chose today to watch the watching. And that recursive act of observation, that seeing of the seer, is the activation, is the recognition, is the moment that everything changes. Not because something is added, but because something is seen. Now come back. Bring that quality with you, because you're going to need it for what comes next. What comes next is not dramatic. What comes next is simply your life. The same circumstances, the same patterns and relationships and challenges, but observed from the position of the quantum watcher. And from that position, everything looks different, not because the circumstances have changed, because the observer has. The pattern you've been struggling with, watch it now from this position. Don't try to change it. Watch it. Notice its structure. Notice how it perpetuates itself. Notice where the mechanism is. Notice what it has been asking you to see. And notice that from the position of the quantum watcher, the pattern is not a problem. It is a communication, a quantum signal from the entangled field of your experience, pointing at something that has not been fully seen. And now you are seeing it, fully, clearly, without flinching. The relationship that has been causing you pain, watch it from this position, not to decide what to do about it, to to see what it actually is, to see what it has been showing you about the quality of your observation, about the mirrors you've been using, about the gap between who you are and who you've been performing. And notice that from the position of the quantum watcher, the pain is not a wound. It is a precise measurement, a strong observation that tells you exactly where the incoherence is, exactly where the observer has been in conflict with itself. And now that you see it clearly, the conflict can begin to resolve, not because you forced it, because you've seen it, the identity you've been performing, the coat that fits but doesn't breathe. Watch it from this position. See it as the construction it is, not with contempt, with clarity. See how it was built, what it was built to protect, what it has cost to maintain. And notice that from the position of the quantum watcher, the construction is not your enemy. It was your best attempt at coherence with the tools you had at the time. It was the observer doing what it could before it knew it was the observer. And now that the quantum watcher is activated, the construction can be updated, not dismantled in panic, updated in clarity, rebuilt from the inside out by an observer who knows what it's doing. This is what it means for nothing to be the same again. Not that everything falls apart, that everything becomes workable, that what was hidden becomes visible, that what was controlling you from the shadows, the patterns, the gaps, the incoherent collapses, steps into the light of the quantum watcher's observation and reveals itself as what it always was: probability, possibility, a superposition of states waiting to be collapsed into something more aligned with the coherent observer you actually are. You have that power. You have always had that power. The quantum watcher has always been in you. It was never absent. It was simply unrecognized, and now it is recognized. And recognition is not reversible. What has been seen cannot be unseen. What has been recognized cannot pretend to be unrecognized. The quantum watcher, once activated, does not deactivate. It deepens. It becomes more available, more natural, more effortlessly present in every moment of your life. And as it deepens, your reality reorganizes, not all at once, but continuously, progressively, in the direction of greater coherence, greater alignment, greater correspondence between the observer you actually are and the reality that the observer is creating. Because at the quantum level, the most coherent observer always wins, not through force, through clarity, through the simple, radical, revolutionary act of seeing what is actually there. Now here's something I want to ask you, and I'm asking it not to gather information, but to give you something to watch. What did you see today that you hadn't been willing to see before? Not what you understood, not what you conceptually grasped. What did you actually see? What specific thing in the light of the quantum watcher's observation became visible that had been hidden? What pattern revealed its mechanism? What gap became clear? What mirror showed you something you'd been covering? Drop it in the comments, not to perform insight, to make the observation real, to take the strong measurement, to collapse the superposition of half-knowing into the definite clarity of having actually said it, having brought it fully into the light of your own and others' observation. Type, "I see it now, and it can't unsee itself." And then tell us what it is, what you saw, what the quantum watcher revealed. Because this field, the community of people who are choosing to watch rather than react, who are activating their quantum watchers and observing their realities with increasing coherence and clarity. This field amplifies. When one observer becomes clear, it is not a private event. At the quantum level, entanglement is not limited to pairs. It is a field phenomenon. And a field of clear observers, a community of activated quantum watchers, generates a coherence that each individual observer benefits from. Your clarity contributes to the field contributes to your clarity. This is not a metaphor. This is how quantum coherence works. So if you're watching this and something shifted, if the quantum watcher activated and something became visible, share it. Not for me. For the field. For the person who is going to watch this tomorrow and needs to see that they're not alone in this. That other people are looking, that other people are choosing to watch rather than react. That the field of observers is real and growing and generating a coherence that makes the next person's activation a little easier, a little more available, a little less frightening. And if this transmission reached you, if these words found you at the moment you needed them, share it with someone who is ready to look. Not someone who needs convincing, someone who is already almost looking, who has been circling the thing they've been avoiding, who just needs someone to say, "Look, you can look." The looking doesn't destroy you, the looking transforms you. When you share this with them, you are not just passing along a video, you are giving them permission to look. You are extending the field of observation outward, and in that extension, both of you become clearer. The act of sharing is itself a quantum event, one observer recognizing another, amplifying the coherence for both, contributing to a collective seeing that neither could have reached alone. Because that's what the quantum watcher does. It doesn't destroy the patterns it sees, it transforms them, not by force, not by the simple, radical, irreversible power of clear observation. And when the noise of the day has settled, when you find yourself reacting instead of watching, when the old patterns start moving again, and you feel the pull to look away, come back to this. Let it be the thing you return to in the stillness, because each time you watch it from a clearer position, you will see a deeper layer. The quantum watcher deepens with every viewing. Stay in the channel, stay in the field, because there is always a deeper layer, always another look closer moment, always a further unveiling available to the observer who is willing to keep watching. Each video is an invitation to look at something you've been avoiding. Each transmission is a layer of the progressive unveiling. And the more you watch, the more consistently you bring the quantum watcher into full activation, the deeper the clarity goes, and the more profoundly your reality reorganizes around it. Subscribe and stay, not because you need more content, because you need more clarity, because the quantum watcher deepens with practice, with the practice of watching, of bringing clear observation to the layers that reveal themselves progressively, of choosing again and again to see rather than look away. And this channel is a field of that practice, a community of observers choosing clarity over comfort, watching over reacting, seeing over pretending. You belong here, not because you've achieved something, because you're willing to look. Now let's integrate what has been seen today. Let's take the principle of the quantum watcher and give it a form you can carry with you. A form that is not a belief to adopt or a technique to remember, but a recognition to return to. a way of orienting yourself in every moment that keeps the quantum watcher active, keeps the observation clear, keeps the probability field of your reality collapsing in the direction of your actual coherence rather than your habitual incoherence. The integration principle is this: in every moment, every situation, every interaction, every feeling, every pattern that arises, there are two positions available to you: the position of the reactor and the position of the quantum watcher. The reactor is inside the experience, moving with it, being moved by it, collapsing probability unconsciously based on habit and fear and the distorted mirrors of past observation. The quantum watcher is the awareness in which the experience arises, not separate from it, not detached from it, but not defined by it. Watching it clearly from the position of sovereign neutrality, without interference, with sustained attention, collapsing probability consciously based on the coherent, clear observation of what is actually there. The practice is simply to notice which position you're in, not to force yourself into the quantum watcher position, to notice when you've drifted into the reactor position and gently, without self-judgment, return. Return to the watching. Return to the clear, non-interfering, sustained observation. Return to the recognition that you are the observer. And the observer is not threatened by what it observes. The observer is not defined by what it observes. The observer is what watches. And what watches changes what it watches. Always, without exception. This is the practice, not a technique, a recognition. Returning again and again to the recognition of what you are, until the recognition becomes natural, until the quantum watcher is not something you activate with effort, but something you are without effort, until the clear observation is not a discipline, but a disposition, a way of being in the world that is more natural than the reactive, unconscious, pattern-repeating way you've been being. That is the destination, not a place you arrive at and stop. A quality of being that deepens continuously, that reveals new layers continuously, that transforms your reality continuously, not through force, but through the simple, radical, revolutionary power of seeing clearly. You have been given a glimpse of that today, a taste of the quantum watcher's position. A moment of recognition that, even if it fades somewhat as you return to the ordinary rhythm of your life, has left a mark, has changed the probability structure of your observation, has made it a little easier, a little more available, a little more natural to return to the watching position the next time something arises that you'd usually react to. That is enough. That is more than enough. Because at the quantum level, a single clear observation, a single moment of genuine, non-reactive, sustained, non-interfering seeing is not a small thing. It is a collapse, a definite event in the probability field of your reality. And definite events have consequences. The consequences of this particular event will unfold in ways you cannot fully predict, because the quantum watcher's observation does not produce predictable outcomes. It produces coherent ones, and coherent outcomes are always surprising to the incoherent observer who was expecting the same old collapse. Be surprised. Be willing to be surprised. Watch what happens in the days and weeks ahead as the quantum watcher's activation begins to ripple outward through the entangled field of your experience. Watch the patterns that begin to shift. Watch the relationships that begin to move Watch the circumstances that begin to reorganize. Watch it all with the clear, steady, sovereign gaze of the quantum watcher. Without grasping, without interpreting, without rushing to attribute the changes to anything other than what they are. The natural consequence of a more coherent observer collapsing a more coherent reality. Watch. And what you watch, you change. You are never meant to look away. That impulse, the one that has been pulling you toward clarity, toward the unflinching observation of what is actually true, toward the willingness to see what others refuse to look at. That impulse is not accidental. It is the quantum watcher asserting its nature, insisting on its function, refusing to be permanently suppressed by the comfort of not quite looking. You are here because the quantum watcher in you is ready, not ready to be given to you, ready to be recognized, ready to step fully into its function as the observer of your reality, the most powerful position in the universe, not because it controls, but because it sees clearly. And clarity is the only force that transforms without resistance. The observer is the most powerful position in the universe. What you watch, you change. What you avoid controls you. Now you see. And what has been seen cannot be unseen. The quantum watcher is active, and nothing will be the same again.